Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next speaker is Audrey Werner, who was a school nurse and worked in the school environment for years and then also practiced in the private sector. So, Audrey, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in the neighboring state of Texas, not too far away, but I'm at work right now between patients. So I will give you my information and you can go from there.
Audrey, you will have about 15 minutes to present.
Okay. Thank you. Perfect, because my next patient is here, so they don't have to wait so long. Okay, my name's Audrey Werner. I'm a professor who teaches the courses on the history of the sexual revolution and sex education. I was also an RN that served as a public health nurse for 14 years at a local county health department, 5 of those years as a school nurse, which entailed teaching sex education. And then 9 of those years, my next job was working in the sexually transmitted disease HIV clinic. For the 5 years I taught sex ed in the schools, and I believed what I was told in my training, that I would decrease the teen pregnancy and the STD rates. However, when I moved to the STD HIV clinic, I saw the opposite was true. More children were becoming sexually active and the rape of women and children was exploding. This led me to question what was happening to them and why or who was behind it. My research led to a man by the name of Alfred Kinsey, a professor at Indiana University, who was first known as the expert in sexual behavior of a gall wasp. He was considered the father of the sexual revolution and did sex studies on humans in the 1930s and 40s. He concluded that children were sexual from birth, incest was not harmful, and one should have sex from birth to adulthood. How he came to his conclusions is the most alarming. He interviewed pedophiles who had raped hundreds of children between the ages of 5 months to 14 years of age, some over a 24-hour period of time. He described children as having an orgasm if they cried, fainted, or fought away from the partner. Notice he did not use the term perpetrator. In organizations that advocate for adult child sex, such as NAMBLA, the North Man Boy Love Association, shared the importance of Kinsey's science in the movement to normalize pedophilia. They stated boy lovers in particular should know Kinsey's work and hold it dear. Implicit in Kinsey is the struggle we fight for today. In your packet, you should have the table 34, which is in his volume, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, which documents the children having orgasms. And now you know what he defined as that. He advocated for the removal of the punishment of rape of women and children in America because as sexual animals, nothing was harmful. He also pushed for obscenity to be shown to children to help them handle their sexuality. The American Law Institute, which was founded in 1923, used his criminal fraudulent data to draft the Model Penal Code in 1955. Of 197 footnotes in the Model Penal Code, Kinsey's the sole authority on normal human sexual behavior in the sex offense section. State commissions were set up to look at what was termed old and antiquated laws that once protected women and children. Experts in the field of law and psychiatry and trained in Kinsey's science portrayed children as seducers, which took responsibility away from the adult. Some legal experts have advocated for the lowering of the age of consent, even as low as 4 to 7 years old. According to Kinsey's trained sex experts, children need to be trained in how to have sex with each other and adults. Obscenity laws that once protected children from sexual words and images had to be removed. SIECUS, the Sex Information Education Council of the United States, was launched from the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University in 1964 and became the sole authority on sex education in America. Its early leader, Dr. Mary Calderon, former medical director of Planned Parenthood, and the seed money for SIECUS came from the world famous pornographer Hugh Hefner. Many sex experts who advocated for sex education in the schools were on record as being paid by Penthouse Forum. The technique used was called sexual attitude restructuring, which groomed children for various sexual activities. The American Legislative Council, the largest bipartisan group of state legislators, has not only proved that Kinsey's science was fraudulent and criminal, but it's been used to remove protections for children. In their report titled The State Factor, Restoring Legal Protections for Women and Children, a historical analysis of the state's criminal codes, April 2004, they shared the following. They talked about since 1964, SECAS has provided sex ed materials to the public schools. It's a private entity. It's received its initial money from the Playboy Foundation. It was founded at the Kinsey Institute, as I have shared. These criminal acts provided the proof, Kinsey said, of sexual desire and erotic capacity in infants and children. Therefore, according to Kinsey's science, requiring teaching kindergarten children about their sexuality. In April of 1980, in the Time magazine, SECAS was described as part of the pro-incest lobby. And in 1996, SECAS issued a statement advocating for the use of sexually explicit materials to teach children. Common sense, sexual words and images are powerful. If you've not viewed pornography, you would understand that. Many states have now declared pornography is creating a public health crisis, which I witnessed firsthand in the mid-1990s when the Clinton administration took the restrictions off the porn industry. In the STD clinic, we saw an explosion of date rape. Sex education is childhood porn, thanks to Kinsey obscenity, that is, pictures and written descriptions of various sexual acts are used to communicate to children about sexuality. Those who embrace Kinsey's view that children are sexual from birth do not see anything wrong with children having sex. In fact, sex education was designed actually to prepare children for sex, and now we say even prepare children for sex trafficking. Dr. Reisman, who was a world-leading authority on Alfred Kinsey, and her report titled Crafting Gay Children, an inquiry into the abuse of the vulnerable youth via government schooling and mainstream media, in the year 2000 warned, the public should be aware of the vigilant efforts to negotiate a child's coming out, as well as the special interest of the sex industry in increasing children's entry into pornography and prostitution. Adult society is responsible for being sufficiently mature to protect our young. There's a different correlation between sex education and sexually transmitted disease rates in America. Once we put sex ed in 64, we see a hockey stick rise in teen pregnancy and STDs. Bad data has led to devastating results for children. For the past 50, 60 years, we have treated children as sexual from birth, which has contributed to the public health crisis we now have today. Last year, or 2 years ago, I traveled to Uganda twice, actually 3 times, and spoke to Parliament as well as to church leaders, university students, professors, and other government officials on the origins and intent of sex education and what it has done to American children over the last 50 or 60 years. Based on that information that I provided to Uganda government and church leaders, they chose to block the UN and Planned Parenthood International's attempt to put sex education in their schools, as they saw it as a threat to the children of Uganda. Uganda chose to protect their children instead of sexualizing them. I implore you to do the same. Please be very careful on what you decide should be done with Oklahoma children. Thank you.
Excellent. We still have plenty of time, members, for questions, so I will open it up to any of you. Okay, Representative Conley, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Werner, for being here and all of the work that you're doing in educating people on the harms of sex education. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first one being the sex education curriculum that is being created today to be used in our schools, is that still being created off of Kinsey's research?
Yes.
And what what kind of pivot do we need to make in the kind of sex education that we're using, or should we not be using it at all? What are your thoughts on all that?
I worked for an organization called RSVP America, which was a campaign from 1994 to 2004. You can go to their website, rsvpamerica.org. And their goal was to wake up state legislators to the origins of, first of the criminal fraudulent science that is being used to throw out good laws and bring in the model penal code in the sex offense section, which, by the way, the American Law Institute is now endorsing much looser restrictions for the pedophile, easier to get off, which is based on Kinsey's science. So this has been ongoing through the years. It's just getting more perverse as we go along. It has been very successful through, if you think that the first children to have been exposed to sex education, and by the way, just to give you an example, RSVP went into 35 states and looked at their sex offense section, and Kinsey was the sole authority on normal human sexuality. I believe Oklahoma was looked at closely as well. And to give you an example, in the state of Missouri, it was considered molesting a minor with immoral intent up to the age of 21 to say the word sexual intercourse in a classroom. We valued the moral innocence of children. As a sex educator, I can tell you that the intent behind sex ed is to take away any modesty and to instill in the children that they are sexual beings above all else. It's a way of indoctrinating them into all forms of sexual deviant lifestyles today. So we used to protect our kids. I did look at antique books because prior to Kinsey, his science came out. Sexual Behavior in the Human Male came out in 1948. Sexual Behavior in the Human Female came out in 1953. The first draft of the Model Penal Code came out in 1955. And the first state to use it was Illinois. In 1957, they adopted it. Each state has fallen along. I'm not sure when Oklahoma did, but they adopted Kinsey's, the American Law Institute Kinsey model. So you'd have to go back in your laws to see when that was done. But we've all been lied to and deceived, and I have had tremendous opportunities. I am on, when I'm not at work, I'm on podcasts, I am in movies. This is coming out, and as you noticed, I think you've noticed, parents are waking up because when they get this information, they're pretty upset because the fruits of what we're seeing, the decline in the traditional family, the rise in sexual perversion has exploded across America. Now we are dealing with child sex trafficking. Some in government at the highest levels are involved with it. So this is all coming out. So it's up. If the American people are waking up, then the legislators who have a chance to do something do the right thing, need to go back and fix what was put in on bad science.
For follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd love to have a copy of your presentation, or even maybe schedule a time for you to do the presentation that you gave to the Ugandan government.
Yes, it is on my website. If you go to Matthew 18, and it's the Roman numeral.org, the actual presentation to Uganda Parliament is under my presentation section. So you can actually see the actual presentation I did for them. And I will tell you, it was interesting, Dr. Nasaba Buturo, who was the former minister of ethics and integrity, who was a current parliament member at the time, he was the first to respond to my talk. And he said, Professor Werner, in our hearts we knew it was wrong, but we didn't know why. You just gave us the why.
Okay, for follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my last question for you, Okay, I now remember. Okay, so I watched a few of your interviews on YouTube, and in one of them, you made the statement that pictures and graphics have gone from cartoon type drawings to now actual pictures in sex education curriculum. Is there any particular curriculum that has moved from the drawings to the actual pictures?
Something that's very common, and I would say even abstinence educators use this technique of going into schools and sharing pictures of diseased genitals. So you're looking at adult female genitals that have diseases, which I know are supposed to be used for scare techniques. But I'll tell you, my daughter, who was in college when she was exposed to this, her freshman year in college, we had taught our kids, when porn pops up, which is popping up everywhere, look away. And that's exactly what my daughter did. And after that abstinence educator left, I'm sure the abstinence educator thought, wow, I bet I scared them. I bet they're not going to have sex. And instead, what it did is it gave them permission to talk openly about sex. And my daughter quickly learned she was the lone virgin in the room. So it's having the opposite effect. The more we're talking about it, the more we're exposing them to it, the more we're sexualizing them. And that's exactly what the intent behind sex ed, in one of the books written in 1977 called The Raping of Our Children, and this was done by a reporter in the 1970s that was noting that sex ed was already impacting America and had only been out for 10 years. And she found a sex ed curricula that predicted that by the year 2000, fathers would no longer have a place in the home and there'd be no more organized religion. And that was truly the intent behind sex education. And it certainly has done its job and done it quite well.
Representative Williams, you are recognized, and members, I'm going to lock the queue for the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Audrey, you said in the beginning that you were teaching sex ed, and then as your knowledge about what happened, you've kind of changed your position. Can you just share what that process kind of looked like? Because you were promoting it in the beginning, and then you saw the perils of it. Kind of give me just a brief look at that, please.
Well, when I was a sex educator, my husband and I hadn't had children yet. And then we wanted to have children. We were blessed with our first child. So that was the reason I shifted to the sexually transmitted disease department, because it was a part-time job. And my husband was a youth pastor at a Christian church. And we had both gone through the very first Christian sex ed program. So my husband, as a youth pastor, was noticing there's no difference between the Christian kid and the kid who wasn't Christian. And I was noticing what I was noticing, which it was getting worse and worse in the STD clinic. The age of first sexual contact, when I first started at the beginning of the 8 years, it was typical to hear 16 or 17 years old was typical age of first sexual contact. By the time I left 8 years at the end, it was not uncommon to hear 10 years old. We had rapists. If someone is accused of rape, they have to come into the STD clinic and get their mandatory HIV test. If they're found guilty of the crime, that's the one time that you can share the results with the victim, because it's a highly confidential. You can't share those results with anyone. By the time I left, we were sharing those results of 10-year-old boys who had raped 2- and 4-year-old girls. As I said, date rape was exploding. So I was seeing firsthand, and the fact that the first Christian sex ed had the same root. I thought, by golly, if the church isn't making a difference, then how do we expect everybody else to make a difference? So when I looked into the Christian sex ed, I found the exact same thing. I found Kinsey, I found Seekis, I found Hugh Hefner, and I found Planned Parenthood. And I thought, wow, this is pretty big. So I initially started to just try and wake up the church, the Christian church, to you're using the wrong stuff. You've taken the Bible and Kinsey and you put it together, doesn't work so well. And so it's been really rough trying to do that. So I shifted my prayer to God, just get me to the remnant. And I ended up doing a legislative briefing in Austin, Texas. And I was kind of surprised that's where I ended up. But I also then ended up going to Uganda Parliament. So, I'm going where people are listening. I was in the movie The Mind Polluters. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It does an excellent job of exposing what is happening to our children, what the origins of sex education. It talks about Kinsey, all of that. And in our state where we have shown it, it had profoundly affected the delegates to the point where they have made the legislative priorities for the upcoming session. 4 out of 8 of them are going to be protect the kids and protect parental rights, because the citizens of Texas are waking up, and mom and dad groups are forming all over the place. My all-time favorite is Mama Bears Rising. So a lot of parents are now taking this back. They are getting back on school boards, they are running for offices, and they are winning.
Okay, for follow-up.
Just a real quick follow-up. I participate in a organization called Celebrate Recovery, and we have open share. And about half the guys, let's say there are 15 in the room, half of them have had a very traumatic, negative sexual experience when a lot of them were preschool age. And it has carried tremendous harm, difficulty throughout their lives, and they didn't know how to deal with it. Have you seen anything similar to that?
Yes, the child on child rape, the adult on child rape has exploded. Think about when little children are seeing pictures, they can't verbally communicate, but they're certainly, if they see dad hitting a hammer and saying a profane word, what are they going to do? Next time they have their little toy hammer, they're going to hit something and they're going to say a profane word. And so if a child is seeing something pornographic, something through sex education or actual pornography online, they are going to turn around and act that out. And that is why I saw the 10-year-old who had raped the 2- and 4-year-old. They're not born sexual from birth. Children have a natural aversion to sexual words and images and acts. They don't automatically want to have sex. Any data that you're looking at that indicates that children should be sexual is usually from a pro-pedophile person such as Alfred Kinsey. So children have an aversion, and as a sex educator, I can tell you that. When we went into the classroom and talked to the kids, we had to suppress the giggling, the discomfort. We had to be very serious and make sure these kids knew the correct name for the genitals, knew how a baby was made, and these were at younger ages.
Representative Fugate, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions, if I may. And let me start by saying I don't think there's anybody around this table that believes or supports in any way, form, or fashion minors having sex. I mean, that's a prime reason for myself why I supported legislation 4 years ago in the House to make it illegal for minors to marry in Oklahoma. But unfortunately, we weren't able to get that all the way to the governor's desk. And so the law still supports them getting married, regardless of age and those involved. But you're a professor and you're a dean at Masters International University of Divinity, which is where your graduate degree is from. Would you tell us about your undergraduate and postgraduate research in the field of sex education?
My research was done after my degrees. This is because firsthand experience. If I was passionate about teaching sex ed because I truly believed I was going to decrease the teen pregnancy and the STD rates. I was told parents aren't doing their job, so I need to go in there and do it for them. So that's why I was a passionate sex educator. I was never taught to do abstinence, but I thought, I'm not going to advocate for children having sex, so I'm going to teach abstinence. And so that was my focus, was to say, hey, what are the and I would talk to teens about it more so, more of the biology when, 30 years ago, it was more on the biology and the correct genital names. And but because of HIV, we were starting to be told to teach children to have safe oral and anal sex as well, even though sodomy was illegal in America back then. The study that I did, or the research that I've done as a mom and as a wife, and as a nurse, because if I'm doing something wrong, I better make sure that I do it right, because I do not want to jeopardize the health of any patient or any child. And what I realized firsthand by seeing things getting much worse with the more sex ed we did, that's what prompted me to do all this research. And every time I offered a little prayer or argued with God and said, I'm not an expert in this, I would get the number one expert in the world. For example, the number one expert on Alfred Kinsey is Dr. Judith Reisman, who is highlighted in the movie The Mind Polluters. She was my mentor. I'm not an expert in the law, but Colonel Ron Ray, who is the former assistant to the Secretary of Defense under Reagan, is a constitutional lawyer, and he trained me on the law. And so consistently, I have gone to the experts and I have done the research myself. And again, if all I'm doing is presenting the facts, I'm not giving you my opinion, I'm not giving you a Bible-based, here's the Bible verses why you shouldn't do that. It's the facts. These are the facts. We have enough data. We know exactly when sex ed went in. If you want to know the future of sex ed, go to the SECUS website. It's pretty stunning where they want to take our kids, and it's awful. It's just awful.
Follow up?
Last follow-up, and then we have one more, and then that's it. We'll be done with you.
Thank you.
I'll ask this in kind of a multi-part thing because it's related. if
Make
I
it
may.
quickly.
Okay. So let me start by saying perhaps you should have taught in Oklahoma, where the primary focus is abstinence. And could you talk a little bit about what you were teaching that was wrong, and the explosion of underage sex? You mentioned when you started there were no 10-year-olds, and when you left there were 10 of 10-year-olds. What was that time frame, and where's that data that you could point to and show us about all these 10-year-olds having sex and attacking each other, et cetera?
If you go to Dr. Judith Reisman has that information as well. Just Google her. I have a link on my website to hers, as well as the RSVP America actually has the graphs to show. And what's interesting is people on those graphs show from the 1950s, 60s through to the year, I think, 1999. And the point is, well, why don't you have more current graphs? If sex ed went in 64, that should be where we're looking, is when it was first officially put in to American schools. That's what we should be looking at. What were the results then from the teen STD and pregnancy? I believe the RSVP also has the rape data in there. I will tell you that the FBI, after the year 2000, they no longer record the age of sodomy victims. Prior, I think it was in 1999 or 2000, I don't have it in front of me right now, but 64% of their sodomy victims were under the age of 10.
Representative Turner, you are recognized.
Thank you. I guess maybe hopefully one day we'll get the methodology for your post-grad research there. But maybe this question is more so
I need a PhD for everything I've done, actually. So I'll work on that. I'll get it official.
But maybe this question is more so for the authors of the study. What is supposed to be the outcome? What are we looking at? What is the outcome of this interim study?
Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The goal of the study was to find out the cause and effect of sex in education and see what it was doing. And at the end of the day, we can make some decisions on what we think needs to be done are not done. But we didn't have an agenda going in, but we have the agenda of protecting, helping children. And we've heard some things today that just they're hard for me to hear about kids raping a 2 and a 4-year-old. I mean, I just can't imagine that, and I can't imagine a 10-year-old doing that. And so the goal of the study is to look at the challenge that we're faced with, and hopefully we can come up with some solutions.
Representative Conley, you're recognized to also give an explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As an educator, one of the things that I did every year was take my fifth graders to their DARE education classes, and DARE education was canceled because one of the arguments that they were making is that when we started the DARE program, it was to try to curb the usage and to try to educate kids on the dangers of it. But what it actually did was, according to their research and their reporting, is that it actually made drug use worse and drug experimentation worse. And so part of my reason for wanting to do this is to see if there was a correlation, that if drug education was causing more drug usage, then is the same thing happening with sex education. And it actually appears, looking at some of this data, that it appears that there is a correlation. So thank you.
All right, and this will be your last follow-up.
Thank you. Okay, so from what I've pulled from today is that when we started out, there was a sentiment of homophobia and transphobia. And then now we're getting here at the end, the summation is that this might lead to substance abuse or use, right? And so there are a couple of different places that we touched on throughout this interim study. And I think the main thing I want to highlight is that when it comes to folks being able to see themselves in a classroom and really be able to show up and educate themselves, those are the things that really eliminate some of the issues that we're coming up against, right? Providing guidance counselors for folks to actually talk about their issues, right? To understand how to healthily self-regulate and all of those things, right? From sex education to just emotional education, public education in general. And I think one of the previous speakers also talked about I think ultimately, right, just showing up in the classroom, right, and students being able to see themselves and have folks understand them, right, talking about creating space for the authentic self. Some of the rhetoric that was shared here for folks who are watching online or will go back and watch this could actually be very damaging. I think about what we've been doing over the past couple of years.
Representative, do you have a question
Ultimately, the question
for our
is,
speaker, or we need to let her go?
alrighty. I think ultimately what I just want to say is moving into legislation, we might want to be very careful about what we're getting ready to do. So
Thank you. All right, is it Dr. Werner?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, well, you have lots of degrees, so I wanted to make sure I was giving you the correct title. So thank you very much. Thank you for your willingness to stay and answer our questions.
Yeah, can I make one comment to the last statement? Whether this is LGBTQ or, I don't advocate for any children of any sexual orientation having sex. It is disastrous. For any child and adult to have sex, it is disastrous. There's enough studies out there to show that. In terms of lifestyle, yes, there is this highlighting of certain sexual lifestyles and preferences, but that should not be put upon children. That's the point here, is we don't need to indoctrinate children into any type, gay or straight, any type. That is what I am against. I have counseled many gay men, and I have had to tell them sometimes that they're HIV positive. Trust me, I do a lot of love on them, and I love all people, but I will never advocate for any sexual lifestyle to be pushed upon children or for them to be indoctrinated in anything sexual. Let's let kids be kids for as long as possible. And that's my last statement.